Ever wondered how our ancestors cooked their food without a lighter? Can you imagine surviving in the wilderness with no matches? Number 7. The bow drill method. The bow drill method stands as one of humanity's most ingenious inventions for creating fire. This technique dates back thousands of years and was used across continents by various civilizations from Native Americans to ancient Europeans. The bow drill consists of 4 main components: a bow, usually a flexible branch with a cord attached to both ends, a spindle, a straight stick, a fireboard, a flat piece of wood with a small depression, and a socket, a stone or hardwood piece to hold the top of the spindle. The process begins with the preparation of these components, which early humans would craft using only stone tools or their bare hands. The bow string wraps around the spindle, and as the person moves the bow back and forth, the spindle rotates rapidly against the fireboard. This friction generates heat, lots of it. Archaeological evidence from sites in Europe shows charred wood remains dating back 400,000 years, suggesting our ancestors mastered fire making long before written history. The magic happens when the temperature reaches about 800 degrees Fahrenheit at the contact point between the spindle and fireboard. This intense friction creates a fine black powder that begins to smoke. This ember, once carefully transferred to a bundle of tinder, dry grass, shredded bark, or other flammable materials, can be gently blown into flame. The entire process demands patience, skill, and practice, attributes our ancestors had in abundance. Indigenous tribes around the world developed specific variations of the bow drill. The Inuit, facing harsh Arctic conditions, often used whale bone for their fireboard and walrus ivory for the socket piece. Meanwhile, tribes in arid regions selected particular desert woods known for their ideal friction properties. These diverse adaptations showcase human ingenuity in response to local environments. Historical accounts from early European explorers describe Native Americans creating fire with bow drills in less than a minute, a feat that modern survival experts often struggle to replicate. The technique represents not just practical knowledge but cultural heritage passed down through generations. Some indigenous cultures infused fire making with spiritual significance, viewing the act as a sacred connection between humans and the natural world. The bow drill method survived as humanity's primary fire-starting technique for countless generations until relatively recent times. Even today, survival experts consider it the most reliable friction-based fire-starting method if you find yourself without modern tools. The technique leaves distinctive archaeological signatures that have helped researchers track the use of controlled fire throughout human evolution. Number 6. The hand drill method. Did you know people once created fire using just 2 sticks? How long would you last if forced to make fire this way? The hand drill represents perhaps the most primitive and widespread fire-starting method in human history. Unlike the bow drill, it requires minimal tools, just a spindle and a fireboard, making it the true test of human persistence and skill. Anthropological studies suggest this technique predates the bow drill and may have been humanity's first intentional fire-starting method. To use the hand drill, one places the spindle, typically a straight branch about 24 inches long, upright in a notch cut into the fireboard. The hands rub the spindle between the palms, moving downward as they rotate it. When reaching the bottom, one must quickly return to the top and continue the motion, a physically demanding process that builds calluses on even the toughest hands. The simplicity of the technique made it universal. Archaeological evidence shows the hand drill was used across Africa, Australia, the Americas, and Asia, with each region developing specific wood combinations based on local flora. African Bushmen traditionally used soft, light-colored wood for the fireboard and harder wood for the spindle. The combination proved critical. Woods that were too similar in hardness often failed to generate sufficient friction. Historical accounts from European settlers in North America describe Native American women creating fire using hand drills while men were away hunting. The technique became deeply embedded in gender roles in some societies, with women maintaining and transporting existing fires while men initiated new ones during migrations or hunting expeditions. The physical demands of the hand drill cannot be overstated. The continuous motion causes exhaustion, and success often requires multiple attempts even for experienced practitioners. Ethnographic studies from the early 20th century documented indigenous people spending upwards of 20 minutes on a single fire-starting attempt, a testament to human determination in the face of necessity. The hand drill's effectiveness varies dramatically with environmental conditions. Humidity represents the greatest challenge, as damp wood resists producing the fine, hot powder necessary for an ember. This limitation led many ancient cultures to develop fire-carrying technologies, enabling them to transport existing embers rather than start new fires during unfavorable conditions. Clay pots filled with smoldering material or hollow logs could keep embers alive for days during migration. Modern experimental archaeologists have demonstrated that the hand drill technique leaves distinctive wear patterns on wooden artifacts, helping researchers identify ancient fire-starting tools even when they're not preserved in obvious fire-making contexts. These subtle clues have expanded our understanding of fire use throughout human prehistory. Number 5. The fire plow method. Have you ever tried rubbing two sticks together? Would you believe this primitive technique kept our ancestors alive? The fire plow, also known as the fire saw, represents one of the simplest yet most physically demanding methods of friction fire starting. This technique appears predominantly in Polynesian, Southeast Asian, and Australian Aboriginal cultures, where it evolved independently from the drill methods used elsewhere. The basic setup involves a fireboard with a groove and a plow stick that one rubs vigorously back and forth in this groove. The friction generates wood dust that collects at the end of the groove, eventually becoming hot enough to ignite. Captain James Cook documented Polynesian islanders using this method during his voyages in the 1770s, noting the remarkable speed with which they could generate fire. Archaeological evidence suggests the fire plow method dates back at least 12,000 years in Oceania. Specific wood combinations proved crucial across the Pacific Islands. Softer woods like hibiscus tilled against harder woods created the ideal friction dynamic. The technique spread throughout island communities as humans colonized the Pacific, with each island adapting the method based on available materials. The physical motion resembles agricultural plowing, hence the name. One person holds the fireboard steady while pushing the plow stick rapidly along the groove. The motion requires significant upper body strength and stamina, with practitioners often developing specific muscles not commonly used in other activities. Ethnographic accounts describe some practitioners creating fire within minutes, a feat requiring tremendous skill and conditioning. Cultural variations of the fire plow appear across the Pacific. Hawaiians developed the olama, a variation where the plower sits with the board braced against their feet. In parts of Australia, Aboriginal peoples created specialized grooves in their fireboards, passed down through generations with increasing efficiency. These cultural adaptations highlight how fire-making techniques evolved alongside cultural practices. The fire plow creates distinctive archaeological signatures. Fireboards with elongated grooves weathered by repeated friction have been recovered from archaeological sites across Polynesia. These artifacts provide tangible evidence of ancient fire-making practices and help modern researchers understand the development of this technology. While less efficient than drilling methods in many environments, the fire plow required fewer components and could be improvised from a wider range of materials. This adaptability made it particularly valuable for island cultures where resource availability fluctuated. The technique remains in use today among some traditional communities, though primarily for cultural demonstrations rather than daily necessity. Number 4. The fire saw method. Could you survive with just a knife and a piece of bamboo? Would you know how to turn plants into fire? The fire saw technique emerged primarily in Southeast Asia and the Pacific regions where bamboo grows abundantly. Unlike other friction methods that require distinct woods of different hardnesses, the fire saw often uses two pieces of the same material, typically split bamboo. This method demonstrates how humans adapted fire-making techniques to local resources. To create fire with this method, one splits a section of bamboo and prepares a notch in one piece. The edge of the other piece is then vigorously rubbed in a sawing motion against the notched piece. The silica content in bamboo, essentially natural glass particles embedded in the plant's structure, creates intensified friction that generates heat more efficiently than many woods. Historical accounts from European explorers in the Philippines and Indonesia described witnessing locals create fire using this method in under a minute. The technique spread throughout regions where bamboo grew naturally, with cultural variations appearing in different communities. Some practitioners added crushed dry bamboo leaves as initial tinder, while others created specialized notches to collect the ember more efficiently. Archaeological evidence for the fire saw proves more challenging to identify than other methods, as bamboo deteriorates quickly in tropical environments. However, ethnographic studies from the early 20th century documented the technique in detail, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. These studies revealed that the fire saw often served as a backup method when primary fire-starting tools were unavailable. The technique requires significant skill and knowledge of bamboo properties. Practitioners select bamboo sections with specific moisture content. Too dry and the bamboo splits unpredictably, too wet and friction becomes insufficient. This knowledge, passed through generations, represents sophisticated understanding of plant properties long before scientific analysis existed. Cultural significance attached to the fire saw varies across regions. In parts of the Philippines, the first fire created after a wedding traditionally used the fire saw method, symbolizing the union's strength through the joining of similar materials to create something new. These cultural practices embedded fire-making knowledge within community rituals, ensuring the skills remained alive. Modern survival experts recognize the fire saw as particularly valuable in tropical environments where bamboo grows abundantly. The technique requires fewer components than drill methods and can be implemented quickly with minimal preparation, advantages in emergency situations where time matters. Number 3. Flint and steel method. Have you ever sparked a flame from a rock? Do you realize this simple technique shaped human civilization? The flint and steel method represented a revolutionary advancement in fire-making technology, arriving much later than friction methods but spreading rapidly once discovered. Archaeological evidence suggests this technique emerged around 3000 BCE with the advent of iron technology, though some cultures struck pyrite against flint for similar results even earlier. The process works through basic chemistry and physics. When steel strikes flint or other hard, silica-rich stones, microscopic particles of steel shear off. These particles, exposed to oxygen in the air and heated by the friction of the strike, oxidize instantly, essentially undergoing rapid rusting. This oxidation creates temperatures exceeding 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, sufficient to ignite proper tinder. Historical accounts describe this method's prevalence throughout medieval Europe, Asia, and later colonial America. By the 16th century, specialized fire-starting kits became common personal possessions, typically containing flint, steel strikers, char cloth, partially burned fabric that catches sparks easily, and additional tinder materials. These kits, often carried in leather pouches or metal tins, represent early examples of purpose-built survival gear. Archaeological evidence for flint and steel use appears in numerous historical sites. Distinctive wear patterns on flint pieces and specialized steel strikers, often C-shaped to maximize striking surface, provide tangible evidence of this technology's widespread adoption. Viking burial sites frequently contain flint and steel components, indicating their importance as essential personal tools. The technique's effectiveness across varying environmental conditions gave it significant advantages over friction methods. While bow drills and hand drills struggle in humid conditions, flint and steel works regardless of weather, a crucial advantage for societies expanding into diverse environments. Historical documents describe European settlers relying heavily on this method during North American colonization. Cultural variations emerged across different regions. Russian variants often used specialized tinder boxes with internal compartments for different materials. Chinese developments included specialized steel designs optimized for consistent sparking. Native American adaptations incorporated local materials for tinder after European introduction of the technology. These variations highlight the method's widespread adoption and cultural integration. The technique requires less physical exertion than friction methods but demands greater preparation of tinder materials. Char cloth, created by partially burning natural fibers in an oxygen-poor environment, became the preferred initial catching material. This innovation highlights the technological sophistication behind seemingly simple methods, as creating effective char cloth required careful control of burn conditions. Number 2, the fire piston method. Can air create fire? Would you believe compression alone can ignite tinder? The fire piston represents one of history's most sophisticated pre-industrial fire-making devices, operating on principles similar to diesel engines. This remarkable invention emerged independently in Southeast Asia, particularly among Dayak communities in Borneo, sometime before European contact in the 18th century. The device consists of a hollow tube sealed at one end, precisely fitted with a plunger that creates an airtight seal. A small piece of tinder, typically char cloth or fungus, sits in a depression at the end of the plunger. When the plunger is rapidly pushed into the tube, the air inside compresses dramatically, heating from approximately 7 TIG F to over 800 egg F in a fraction of a second, sufficient temperature to ignite the tinder. The physics behind this method involves adiabatic compression, the principle that compressing gas increases its temperature if no heat escapes during the process. This scientific principle wasn't formally described in Western science until the 19th century, yet indigenous people had harnessed it centuries earlier through empirical observation and ingenuity. Historical accounts from European travelers describe fire pistons crafted from water buffalo horn, bamboo, or hardwoods. These materials provided the necessary strength and airtight properties essential for successful compression. Specialized seals created from fibers or resins ensured the critical air compression occurred without leakage. The craftsmanship involved demonstrates remarkable engineering precision without modern tools. Cultural significance surrounded fire pistons in various communities. Among certain indigenous groups in the Philippines, fire pistons represented status symbols, often intricately carved and passed down through generations. The devices sometimes bore spiritual significance, linking the mysterious appearance of fire from compression with creation myths or spiritual forces. Archaeological examples of fire pistons remain relatively rare due to the organic materials used in their construction. However, museum collections preserve specimens collected during early European contact, providing tangible evidence of this sophisticated technology. These artifacts display remarkable standardization in design despite being created across widespread geographic areas without centralized manufacturing. The technique spread throughout Southeast Asia, reaching Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and parts of Myanmar. Each region developed specific adaptations based on available materials. Some variants used lead balls at the cylinder base to improve compression. Others developed specialized tinder preparations optimized for the unique ignition properties of compression fire. European travelers first documented fire pistons in the late 18th century, and by the early 19th century, the technology had been adapted into European scientific instruments and luxury fire-starting devices. This adoption represents one of many examples where indigenous knowledge preceded and informed Western scientific development. Number 1. The sun and glass method. Did ancient humans harness sunlight before electricity? How could transparent materials create deadly heat? The sun and glass method, sometimes called solar ignition, represents one of the earliest applications of optics for practical purposes. While requiring specific materials that limited its widespread adoption, This method demonstrates ancient understanding of light concentration principles long before formal scientific explanation. Historical records suggest knowledge of this technique dates to classical antiquity. Greek mathematician Archimedes allegedly used polished bronze shields to concentrate sunlight and set enemy ships ablaze during the siege of Syracuse in 212 BCE. While modern experiments cast doubt on the military effectiveness of this approach, they confirm the physical possibility of solar ignition using ancient materials. Archaeological evidence includes carefully shaped crystal lenses found in ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian contexts, some dating to 700 BCE. These artifacts, often interpreted as decorative or magnifying objects, could have served fire-starting functions through solar concentration. Viking settlements have yielded polished rock crystal lenses that archaeological experiments demonstrate can successfully ignite tinder under favorable conditions. The technique requires specific natural materials with appropriate optical properties. Rock crystal, clear quartz, ice in Arctic regions, and naturally rounded water-filled vessels all served as historical solar concentrators. These materials, when shaped into convex forms, concentrate sunlight into a focused point where temperatures can exceed 800 degrees Fahrenheit, sufficient to ignite properly prepared tinder. Cultural documents describe solar ignition in various civilizations. Ancient Chinese texts mention burning mirrors used to concentrate sunlight. Roman scholar Pliny the Elder described crystal balls used as fire starters. These historical references, combined with archaeological findings, confirm the method's cross-cultural development. The technique's effectiveness depends heavily on environmental conditions. Clear, sunny days provide optimal results, while cloudy conditions render the method useless. This limitation restricted its practical application primarily to ceremonial or specialized contexts rather than everyday use in many regions. However, in consistently sunny environments, solar ignition offered advantages over friction methods that required significant physical exertion. Scientific understanding of this method evolved significantly over time. By the 13th century, European scholars like Roger Bacon described precise optical principles behind solar concentration. Later scientific developments refined the understanding of focal lengths and optimal shapes for solar concentration, though the basic principle remained unchanged from ancient applications. The method experienced revival during various historical periods. European naturalists often carried pocket burning glasses during 18th and 19th century expeditions. Colonial scientists demonstrated the technique to indigenous peoples who had developed other fire-making methods but lacked transparent materials for solar ignition. These cultural exchanges further disseminated knowledge of diverse fire-making technologies. Pre-industrial manufacturing eventually produced specialized fire-starting magnifying glasses, often incorporated into gentlemen's pocket kits alongside other tools. These commercially produced tools standardized what had previously been opportunistic use of natural materials, making the technique more reliable and accessible to those who could afford such luxuries. Can you imagine relying on any of these methods if suddenly thrust back in time? Would modern humans, accustomed to instant fire at the flick of a switch, survive using these ancient techniques?